Okay, and if we move from North London over to East London, Wayne, and talk about West Ham, sounds like also they're in the market for a certain position too.
Yeah, I mean, West Ham very much in the market for a forward. They've just had the sort of shattering news that Lucas Paqueta is likely to be out for 2 months with a calf injury. The fans aren't very happy that David Moyes started him in the FA Cup last weekend after he had already been injured the previous week in the warm-up. He is obviously their outstanding player, and West Ham have been in need of a centre-forward for some time anyway. Antonio's out for 6 weeks. So Jarrod Bowen's been playing centre-forward with great success. Their front three have been amazing in the last couple of months. They've really, really clicked and been really good fun to watch as well, Paqueta, Bowen and Mohamed Kudus. So West Ham are on the market for forward. They aren't trying to hide that. And if they can get one, then Danny Ings will likely go on loan, but Ben Rama could potentially leave as well. But the Ben Rama does unlikely now, given Paqueta's injury. But that makes West Ham's need for a centre forward sort of even more acute as well. And they're looking at various targets, obviously players who have been mentioned already publicly, like Hugo Ekitike at PSG. He's likely to be available. Steven Bergwijn, who's versatile forward, can play various roles. Previously played at Tottenham. Jack Clark's another, but none of them are orthodox centre forwards, but they do. But Bowen has been playing that role with some success. So I'd very much anticipate West Ham signing a forward of some description, maybe one who can play various different positions before the window shuts, and then if they can get that deal done, Danny Ings going out on loan.
So, Brian, I'm really intrigued to get your view on this. So, Lucas Paqueta has been mentioned. You know, he's been exceptional for West Ham this season. Now he's out for 2 months. In a situation like that, when a star gets injured, you know, you're in the middle of the January transfer window, you get some really bad news. How does that change your transfer plans? And then do you then accelerate looking at that position? Does that affect it at all? Because it's quite obvious what West Ham have lacked this season is a real number 9. But with Lucas Paqueta being out, will that affect any of their transfer plans?
Well, it must do. I mean, you know, all of a sudden there's an injury situation comes up. Maybe you hadn't thought about bringing another forward in there. All of a sudden, all that changes. What's your number one priority? I've again spoken to a couple of people, and 2 names that came up who are playing over in Germany. There's a boy Sahar Gurasi, who plays at Stuttgart, centre forward.
Yeah.
Who could be of interest. Decent money. Frimpong at Leverkusen. Yeah. Is another one who's been scoring goals in Germany and could be the type of player that David Moyes would bring in. It's funny he signed Kudus, because again, Kudus was brought through from the Right to Dream Academy in Ghana. Right. And the team in Denmark, Nordsjælland, are the owner of Nordsjælland is also the owner of the Right to Dream Academy in Ghana, and he's had a great influx of players. Now anybody could have bought Kudus for £2.5 million 5 years ago before he went to Ajax. Anybody. And a lot of teams looked at him. We looked at him when I was at Villa, because that was my last job. And I spoke to Tom Vernon, and he was quite prepared, because what he was looking for as well was a little bit of a link up with a Premier League club through his club in Copenhagen and the club in Ghana. So these kind of players, and I know Manchester United had him on the plate again. And this is through their very, very good Scandinavian scout by a fella called Tommy Muller-Nielsen, whose father won the European Championships. He got brought in to lead Denmark in '92 because Yugoslavia had to drop out due to the war. Denmark come in, no chance, ended up winning it, and his father won it. And Tommy's been working for Manchester United now, or he was, for 8-9 years. He passed away last year, Tommy, and his son is actually filling in, or not filling in, but he's continuing the work, I believe. I don't know whether he's got a full-time position at Man U, but Tommy certainly had. And Tommy brought names up for Man U, which you could only dream about. The boy Hugo Larsson at Malmo, another player. And this is why people seem to back off from Scandinavian players during the last, just before the pandemic, etc. But they had a player there called Hugo Larsson, 17, Man United, everything done, dusted, nothing happened. Again, poor communication allowed the boy to move from, I think it was 1.8, followed by another million, followed by another million as he progressed, coming up to 5. And never happened. Eintracht came in and bought him for 23 million euros.
Wow.
And, these are the players that clubs tend to think, oh, well, he's not with a big club or he's not a big name club. The recommendations, or as it is today, the stats don't add up. I'm sick to death of hearing people talking to me about stats. If he can play and he looks fit and he's a decent lad, got a good life, then you bring him in. I don't know how many. I don't care how many balls he's had on his left foot or his right foot or on his bleeding ankle or whatever. All I know is, can the kid play? And if he can, let's look to bring him in. And that's how I worked. And that's how all the years I worked in scouting. That's the way we look at it. You can't beat a pair of eyes. You can't legislate if he's going to get injured or if his wife gets upset for living in this part of the world. But, you have to go with your feelings. And I'm afraid today things are changing and people are saying to me, well, you're old-fashioned anyway. So it ain't done bad for me spotting players. And I think it's a good way, and still is a good way, to analyse and look at a player. You get a feel for a player, and you're working for a good club.
I think you're right, Brian. I think the eye test nowadays is certainly overlooked in comparison to looking at XG stats, shot on goal, whatever. That people forget that you actually need to watch football and not just read it on a piece of paper. But that does bring us on nicely.
The good point also is recruitment teams have to convince owners, don't they? And they can convince them with data now, rather than rather than the chief scout thinks he's going to be elite, or here are the stats, and this is the way they convince ownerships and executive teams, isn't it? But
sporting director is a position in a football club, which for me is, in some cases and very few, money well spent, but in most, because he's a sporting director in a football club, so what? What's he done? Who's he brought in? I'm not going to criticise the people that Spurs are using or the people that Spurs have brought in, but they didn't have a good record at Villa.
No.
And they've certainly got to prove it here. And going back to your point about who brings in the players at Spurs or any other football club, if you employ a manager and the manager's worth his salt, he will not allow a player to come into that football club unless he's happy with it. That's for sure. No matter what the deal's worth or how cheap he was or how expensive he's going to be, if the manager says, no, I don't fancy him, then you shouldn't go any further, because he's a guy who's got to work with him.
Yeah.
You've just watched a segment from Football Insider's brand new podcast, The Inside Track, with me, Lewis Pearce, alongside the guests on the show. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please do give the video a like, comment your thoughts on the topic, and feel free to share on your social media pages. If you want to listen to the full podcast episode, click the link in the description below. Keep your eyes peeled for plenty more content and exclusives here on The Inside Track.